This week, we discuss what makes a good breach response. No interviews this week, but we've got a two-part news segment for you as we catch up from being off for a little bit last week. In the enterprise security news, not much funding, but Spider Oak and Hypori reinvent themselves. Thoma Bravo picks up Magnet Forensics for $1.34 billion. More layoffs. Buyers call bluff on unicorn valuations. China aims to grow its cybersecurity industry. Orca is the first security company to embed ChatGPT into its product. Credit card honey tokens. Breaches are increasingly caused by third parties. Top 5 pen test findings from 2022. Click Google-sponsored links at your own peril. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy Australia Day. This is episode 303, recorded on Thursday, January 26, 2023. I wrote 2022, but it is 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me today is Tyler Shields. How are you, Tyler? I don't have my usual script.
Well, that's okay. I mean, I have one for you. Since you are in a weird place because you are sick, I'm going to call you the king of COVID, the genius of germs, Adrian Sanabria. There it is.
Thank you for that. That's great. I love it. I love it. Also joining me today is Sean Metcalf. How are you, Sean?
Doing good. Recovering from being at the ShmooCon conference in Washington, D.C. over the weekend. Long weekend, but a great time catching up with folks old and new and talking about all things Trimark and cybersecurity. And yeah, lots of good times. In fact, one of the things that was done in the lobby, one of the hacker shenanigans, was opening up a box of Batman cereal from, I believe, the late 80s. And some people actually ate it. I did not do that because I do not do stuff like that. But apparently, Grifter bought it off of eBay, and some people actually had some. I stayed away, and my stomach was fine.
Well, I have something funny that goes along with that. So when I was doing cybersecurity consulting for @Stake in the early 2000s, one of my very first projects was to do work for the executive office of the president. And I had to go up to DC, and I bought myself two things. I think it was 2001 or 2002. I bought myself two things. I bought myself a Christmas ornament for my Christmas tree, which was like the annual Christmas ornament that they put out. I think it was '02. And I bought myself a box of presidential M&Ms that still sit on my desk 20 years later. I'm afraid of.
Wow. I dare you to eat one right now.
I bet the M&Ms are fine. I bet they're fine.
They're candy-coated chocolate.
A good friend of mine, Travis Goodspeed, has some old cans of the 1982 World's Fair beer. And it's a tradition. Every year we open a can and drink it.
Oh my God, how does it taste?
So the carbonation's gone, the alcohol's gone. So it just tastes kind of sweet and syrupy. Like it doesn't taste like it's going to kill you. But there's little flecks of metal floating in it, so that's probably not good. But I haven't died yet.
The alcohol is fermented in a non-alcohol.
It's gone full circle.
Yeah. Just don't drink the cans that are already half empty for some reason. If the seal has been broken. But so today's. I think it's appropriate. It's Australia today because my day's a bit topsy-turvy, a bit upside down. As you can tell, I am not coming in from my normal location, from my living room podcasting setup. I am in Santa Clara for the Usenix Enigma conference, but I am COVID positive. So they're going to be running a recording of my talk instead of me getting up on stage. And I'm hanging out here, just me and my buddy COVID in my hotel room. So I wasn't going to host today, but since I can't speak today, here I am.
Great. So are people going to knock on your door and be like, question for you?
Actually, there was, if I was a little bit more on top of it, I would be getting room service here in a moment, but I got a bit distracted onto other things. So I'm going to get some food delivered in after we finish up the podcast here. But yeah, no, I don't think anybody's going to come knocking. Maybe house cleaning. All right, for today's topic, as I mentioned in the intro, we don't have any guest interviews this week. So instead, we're going to cover a topic that I think is pretty interesting, and it's breach responses. How companies respond to breaches is definitely a hot topic for us. We discuss a lot of breaches as they occur, and we're not always 100% happy with those responses. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're just outright terrible. And I thought it would be interesting to break down what makes a good and a bad breach response. And I think it would be interesting if we could even, maybe as an output of this chat, we could put together like a scoring system for breaches, perhaps. I think that would be pretty interesting. Basically, rate somebody's breach response, or come up with maybe a checklist for companies to say, hey, are we talking about all the right things when we announce this breach?
So let me ask a quick question for you, Adrian. Breach response is an interesting topic. Don't a lot of companies try to tackle this exact question to grade their own versions of breach responses based off of tabletop exercises?
They should. Yeah, that's a good question. I've done some tabletops way in the past when I used to be a consultant. I don't know if you've done more, Sean, but I should hope, and I definitely, tell companies when I advise them about incident response, putting together their incident response plans, that this is something they should practice. A good breach response goes a long way to putting your customers' fears at rest.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's different elements of breach response. So when someone says breach response, my initial thinking is, okay, what do you do once you realize something is off? What is that first, 4, 12, 24 hours? What do you do during that time? Because that's the time that really matters the most is what happens initially. Are you pulling systems offline? You probably shouldn't. You should probably be reaching out to a quality incident response company and have them give you guidance on what to do next. You need to get legal involved. Depending on the company and the size of the company, you need to get PR involved so that you can manage communication around this. Depending on what's affected and where your company is located, there's certain regulatory and contractual requirements that you need to start implementing as far as notifications within a 24 or 48 hour period. So a lot of this has to happen pretty quickly. And to Tyler's comment, yeah, there's things that you should be prepped for even before you get in that situation with tabletops. Tabletops often come down to who handles what when, in what order are they handled, and also what are the sort of technical and process aspects that happen around that. And then there's the other side of it, which is the notification to the community, to the public, to your customers. If your organization is breached, what does that look like? How is that done? What sort of level of detail do you provide? It's complicated, but I love this topic because it's one of those things that, as we've seen, a lot of companies have not managed appropriately. And when you don't manage it appropriately, customers lose faith and they shift to a competitive product.
So my thoughts on the tabletop exercises, they just I've done one within the last year with the previous company, and every time I do one, it feels like we're just playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Like it feels like it really needs to be built and gamified into, you roll the dice, see what happens, this happens, and then you have to figure out how to handle it so that your company doesn't burn down and you die, right? Like it feels like just a really cool version of a Dungeons and Dragons game.
So it's kind of like when you get on the cruise ship and everyone has to muster and put on the life jacket, and then you just go, okay, we're here. You wait there for a little while, and then you can go back to actually enjoying the cruise. So what I hear you say, Tyler, is it's one of those things that you just kind of do because you check the box, but nothing really comes out of it. Nothing's really identified. Maybe it's not implemented in the process in such a way where it actually matters and has an impact, where people are just going, okay, we did this tabletop and then we moved on with our work, which is certainly not how that should work.
Actually, quite the opposite, Sean. What I mean by that is, I think in today's versions of tabletops, that's what comes across. Exactly what you're saying. And I think it needs to be gamified. Like, it really could truly be gamified, where you roll, a 1d20. If you roll 1 to 6, the hacker deletes the logs. If you roll 7 through 10, the hacker does lateral movement to another box. Like, you could do such a fun gamified version of that that people would be interested in actually executing, I would think.
Yeah, so Black Hills Information Security, based out of I'm blanking on exactly where it is, but north upper northwest. And John Strand's company basically created backdoors and breaches. So it's exactly that, the gamification of a tabletop where you do roll dice. I've got some decks of cards here, and there's expansion packs that other companies actually build on and enhance. So that way you can do a tabletop. There's an online version also. So you can do a tabletop where it's gamified. You walk through it. It's kind of like the Dungeons and Dragons where you're rolling, you're getting this up, a hacker does this, but you have the ability to counter with this. So it's kind of fun, it's interesting, but it also gets people thinking about how to really focus on security in the environment and what should be done or what could be done in these scenarios and situations.
Yeah, and I know this topic was originally scheduled to be like breach response, what makes a good breach response and what doesn't, but I think the concepts that we're discussing about preparation leads directly into the original topic, right? And the original topic being, how do you do it better? And one of those ways is prepare.
Yeah. So a good friend of mine, John, who used to run, I don't think he really runs the podcast anymore, but Purple Squad Security was never a huge podcast, but it was one of my favorites because every 10 episodes, he would have hosts from other podcasts on, and he would do, like you needed to have dice with you, he would do like a D&D style IR tabletop. And those are some of my favorite episodes. So you can go back through Purple Squad Sec, find all I think basically every 10 episodes for a while there, he would do this. I don't know if it was exactly like episode 10, episode 20, but you can go back and find some of these. And if you want some ideas on how to do like a D&D style tabletop, I think those are some great examples, is when he did some of those episodes.
I found the deck, so backdoors and breaches, and then there's a grouping of cards. This is Initial Compromise, so it looks like this, and then you've got a number of other cards, such as the Pivot and Escalate, so what the attacker actually did in the environment. Then it moves on to Persistence, what is the attacker doing once they're in the environment. Then it moves on to the C2 and exfil, and then ultimately the procedures, what you're doing at that point, what is the process that you're going to do. You drop the cards down, you roll the dice, you walk through the process and figure out what this environment looks like, what the attackers are doing in it, and what you can do to kind of fix it or clean it up or get things to a better state. The other part that layers onto that are some of the things that we're talking about, which is how do you communicate? What is your process? What are the contractual requirements? Because if there's contractual requirements or legal requirements, regulatory requirements, as far as reporting on a breach, then those things have to be identified right now. Like your company should be aware of those immediately. So that way, if something does happen, they know how to appropriately respond. Because from the regulatory standpoint, if you have a 24-hour reporting period and you've identified that there is a breach, you've got to make sure that you're inside that window and that you're working with legal to ensure that you have the appropriate response and notification to that authority.
And take events from real life. You know, sometimes the attacker beats you to the punch, and they're the first ones to release details about the breach. Maybe you didn't realize that the attacker got the CEO's email, and they dumped the CEO's email somewhere. They leak it where everybody can read it. Like there's crazy stuff that happens that's absolutely on the table and should potentially be part of your tabletop to explore.
I think we should take this to its logical conclusion and full on LARP this. I will dress like Neo from the Matrix. and I'm bringing my dice, baby. Let's go.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love it. Thank you for that picture in my head, Tyler. All right. So kind of part of my goal here is to discuss some information that companies can use to get better breach notifications. And certainly where I was going to start was left to boom, which is where we are right now. And to quickly explain what that means, so Neil, you created a framework called the Cyber Defense Framework. That's basically a 5x5 grid. And it describes the different phases of, security preparation and response. And so you have left of boom and right of boom, where boom is some kind of security incident. Maybe it's a breach, maybe it's not. But to left of boom, you have preparation and identification. That's what we're talking about now, doing tabletops, making sure you know what assets you have, trying to predict what could happen in an incident and preparing, doing everything you can to prepare for that. And then right of boom, you have detection, which maybe you find out that you've had an incident. Maybe the attacker helps you out by publishing something publicly, and that's your detection. That's how you find out. And then your response workflow, and then recovery are the last two columns in that 5x5 matrix. So right now we've been talking left of boom, and this is really important because depending on what the attacker releases, like you won't necessarily be able to control the information when things go sideways and you're right of boom. So you want to make sure that whatever picture of your company that people are seeing, that you did a good job of preparation, and it doesn't look like you just completely neglected all the security activities that people would have expected you to do, and that you maybe even said that you did. And certainly plenty of cases where companies clearly didn't walk the walk, didn't do what they said they did, and that'll come out in a lot of the breach details.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you have a situation where the attacker is actually publishing information about the breach. We saw that with Uber. We've seen that with a number of the others have happened in the last year or so, where they're starting to publish information.
All the lapses, right?
Yeah, the lapses stuff. Lots of lapses stuff, right? That's very interesting to me because before it was basically the attacker didn't want to show their hand and actually show that they've been in the environment. But certainly reasons for breaching a company vary from actually having defacing a website was kind of the old school way of saying, "Hey, I'm here, I'm legit," but that shifted into this model where we have ransomware, we have other threats, we have crimeware, we have situations where there's a lot of different motivations and attackers on the same network often that could be competing. Maybe one is patching something that was vulnerable so that another attack organization can't get access or leverage that environment. We have brokers effectively that are brokering access from one group that is retained access in a large company that's very well known, and then brokering that to another ransomware group that is then dropping something in there and trying to extract some funds, some Bitcoin or whatever from that environment. So it's very interesting to see this situation where things have evolved from the attacker generally stays fairly quiet and the organization themselves can take their time in order to handle that response, to now you almost have to hire a PR firm when you identify something because something has been put out on Twitter or another social media site, and the attacker is starting to show screenshots of internal development systems, internal admin, super user consoles and things like that, where they're going, look, I have access to this. Okay, now you need almost PR level response to handle kind of the blowback of that. And then it becomes okay, well, based on what they're showing, this is this, and it's going to take us a little bit to investigate that and ensure and identify really what is truly the access that they have, or were they kind of just showing something that's more than what it is.
Well, that should be part of your preparation, right? If you're going to use a crisis
Absolutely.
Communications firm, you should already have them on retainer. You should have already talked to them, said, hey, we intend to use you if we have a breach. If you're going to use a third party to help with the breach investigation, Are they on your cyber insurance list? Is it somebody that you're even allowed to use if you plan on using your cyber insurance to help pay for this thing? That's something you should already know. Are you going to pay the ransom or not? That's something you should already know. These are all things that if you don't already have planned out, it can look really, really bad for you if you're figuring out the stuff on the fly. And you can generally tell those companies that haven't done the preparation, that don't have a plan for this, because they kind of go through the stages of grief, that they deny that the breach has occurred. They try to keep it from going public. They do all these things that we know don't work and just make your company look bad. They make you look incompetent. But when you don't have a plan, that's tough. Or anybody with experience going through this. This is something where you've got to be calm, calculated, and just pull out the plan and follow the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. It always looks bad when it goes from there was no breach, nothing important was touched, to, okay, we identified something of value or something that could be sensitive was accessed or viewed, to, okay, yes, something was accessed and copied and pulled off, and that happened to have customer information, but it's encrypted. Okay, well, it wasn't entirely encrypted because we stored the private key in that database.
I think I know what breach you're talking about.
And then they were able to have that also. And now, okay, well, yeah, the attacker actually has all the information about our customers. That kind of level does look very bad. Something that can be quite concerning as a customer, or if it's business to business. I mean, every business has a customer, whether it's the consumer, whether it's the advertiser, whether it's another business, and that's brand recognition, that's reputation. And that can be as bad as losing money directly because the system is offline.
Yeah, so let's use some examples here. Let's get right of breach. The breach has happened. Somehow you found out about it. Maybe you discovered it. Maybe the attacker. There's some claims on social media. And the media is starting to pick it up, starting to write stories about it. And there's definitely some great examples and some not so great examples here. So with SolarGate, with SolarWinds, I remember distinctly when FireEye and Mandiant were still one company then. They hadn't been broken into two companies, I don't think, yet at that point. But they came out on day one with most of the details you would want to know on day one of a breach, and tons of IOCs. Like they were prepared with all kinds of details about, if this thing has affected you, here's what they've got. They stole some tools from us. Here's exactly what tools they stole, what those tools did. And they're mostly red team tools, pen testing tools, things like that. I thought that was a great response. Everything I heard about it was very positive. What's your recollection of that, you guys?
Absolutely. So I remember the same thing, Adrian. I thought it was top notch. I think there was a lot of detail pretty quickly. Certainly the folks over at Mandiant, I've know of them, worked with some of them before. It's top notch all across the board. Lots of great information, useful information, actionable information, which is key, especially when you have something on the scale of SolarGate, which affected on-prem systems. So just to kind of give some background around what SolarGate was, SolarWinds is a tool that's used for monitoring and management in a lot of companies. On their website, they had listed some of the largest companies around the world, including some of the best-known federal government agencies in the United States and elsewhere. So certainly these organizations have been using SolarWinds for managing of their systems. I went through and did some analysis of what SolarWinds actually had as far as product space, and it covered Active Directory, of course, Azure AD, Azure, AWS. It covered SQL on-prem and a lot of other systems, including VMware. So when you start looking at what are your crown jewels in the environment, it's going to be your identity, Active Directory, Azure AD. It's going to be your infrastructure, VMware, Azure, AWS. It's going to be where your data resides, SQL, Oracle, etc. And SolarWinds potentially could have access to all those things, and in most cases, privileged access to those systems. And based on their documentation, most of that was privileged access, admin level or root level access to all of those systems, or most of them. So when you talk about an attacker compromising the SolarWinds code, the source code, and the build process, which is actually what they compromised, was the build process. They didn't necessarily touch the source code, but once the source code goes through the build system turns that into the executables that are then run by the customer, used by the customer. They compromised that, so every time a new build was done, it would include the attacker's code in it and would be able to call back and do what they wanted it to, which effectively turned the SolarWinds agents into C2s, or attacker control agents. So SolarWinds put this up on their auto update. The customers would pull down the auto updates. So this is one of those rare situations where having auto updates and internet updates turned on was a bad thing, because then you got the malicious SolarWinds versions now running in your environment and getting pushed out to all your systems, or at least all of those that SolarWinds was monitoring. So then it was a cascading effect. Active Directory falls, and as well as a lot of your other systems down the line. And you end up with a situation where this attacker has such a target-rich environment where they can pick and choose who they actually want to go in and remotely control and access. So they had a huge range of customers. What was interesting about this is Mandiant wasn't one of those ones that was affected by the actual on-prem SolarWinds component of it, but another element of the attack was the cloud component, going after vulnerable cloud configurations. There's this, at the time, very not well understood thing called partner access, or partner administration, or delegated partner administration through Azure AD, where you could have your tenant, but it could actually be managed by a partner, a cloud service provider, or CSP. And so this is configured typically. The customer or the company would approve the CSP for having this level of access, which is delegated global admin rights or root access to their Azure AD environment. And that's effectively what the attacker did. They jumped into that other environment, that CSP, and then from there they had full admin access to the target that they wanted to go after. And then they started pulling things from there. Microsoft has since provided a better, more granular type of access that they call granular delegated admin configuration. So that's the way to configure that and set that up. We at Trimark, we do assessments of Azure AD environments, and we see this partner configuration pretty rare. It's probably about 5%, maybe as much as 10% of the time. But when you see it, most of the time they are configured with global admin rights into that environment. So it is something that should be checked on a regular basis to ensure that the partner access is appropriate. And the thing that was really interesting about this is when there's a license reseller, which often happens with cloud, that's managing those licenses, they usually get direct automatic access to that environment at that level, at that same level of global admin. So that was the other element of Solarigate, which made this very interesting, is you had the on-prem SolarWinds situation, and then you had the same threat actor going after cloud environments through this delegated access. And the delegated access was such that the CSP, they had a bunch of users in those groups. That group that provided global admin rights to their customer environment, it was all their customer environments. There was no way to say, okay, these group of people within our tenant can then manage these specific customer environments. No, it was one to all. And so with Granular, it enables a much better limited access, as well as being able to more pick and choose and identify who within that CSP could actually have that access. So this whole thing was prone to vulnerability, so to speak, and the SolarWinds issues, grew and became a big deal. SolarWinds agents end up on domain controllers, so that means Active Directory can be compromised if you can compromise that agent. So, yeah, really big deal. And I thought that the great thing about Mandiant providing these IOCs is that meant customers could go through, they could check the version of SolarWinds to make sure that they were not on a vulnerable version. If they were, shut it down, work on cleanup, and ensure that they're blocking those types of activities that were being seen. And the other great thing about it is they said this is the vulnerable version. If you have the version prior to this, turn off auto updating. So that was great too. So I agree with you, Adrian. It was very helpful.
So I want to ask a question. It sounds like the best practice, and what I want to tease out here. Actually, you know what? I don't think I need to ask this question because it's a hot take. I'm going to have Big Head Tyler ask it. Big Head Tyler, for those that can't see this, Big Head Tyler is a massive version of my own head that's not really me. He wants to know, because it seems like we have a bit of a bias here towards transparency, overly transparent, give the world everything we know, be overly transparent. Is there an appropriate time when transparency is the wrong path and obfuscation or giving just enough data to get by would be the right path? Or are we all in opinion that, hey, no, transparency is almost always going to be the way to go here?
Yeah, I think not being a lawyer, that's a tough one. Some people may have a reason why you don't want to be totally transparent, but every time I see somebody, trying to hide the details, it blows up in their face. Like I can't imagine a really good argument for not going public. Now, certainly that doesn't mean make a bunch of guesses as to what's going on or try and minimize the problem or anything like that. Like, if being transparent means, hey, we don't know what's going on yet, but we're investigating, then that's fine. Say that. Don't don't make up a bunch of stuff or tell your customers, yeah, nothing to worry about, if you don't know if there's anything to worry about yet. Too many times we've seen that where the company is transparent and says, yeah, nothing to see here, no big deal, and then the attacker sees that and they're like, all right, watch this, and then they
here, hold my beer.
Yeah, like that's the worst thing is, oh, this attacker, like nothing bad happened, like that's how HB Gary Federal got hacked out of existence.
That was a brutal one back in the day.
Yeah, they basically they poked the bear. They said, hey, we're gonna, Anonymous is just a bunch of snot-nosed kids, don't know what they're doing. We're gonna expose them, and boy, that was ugly. That was really, really ugly.
Having been on a lot of different sides of breaches and providing some expertise behind it, I don't do incident response, but have worked with the incident response teams as a subject matter expert in Active Directory and Azure AD. What I've seen in the breaches and the breach responses that I've worked has been, it's a balancing act. You want to provide information. I would say always be clear and direct about what you know and what you don't know, insofar as what you're comfortable with sharing as appropriate. So there are certainly situations where you can potentially share too much because you're working off an assumption or you believe that to be true. Sticking with what you know will often help guide you. So if you know that they were able to compromise these specific systems and those systems affect customers that affects credit card data, PCI data, healthcare information, certainly follow the guidelines and rules around that. If you're not certain, follow the rules around if you're not certain. But I would say, again, my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, work closely with your response team to ensure that you have an appropriate response for that and that you're providing as much accurate and detailed information as possible that you're comfortable with, because you can say too much about something and go, oh, wait, we actually identified that they didn't have access to that, and put up the alarm too early. There's a difference between the attacker probing something, them getting onto a system, them having view access on encrypted data or data sources, to then being able to view it, to then being able to admin it, to then being able to extract it. And each of those different types of accesses require a different type of response. One of the big challenges with a breach is appropriately scoping it in order to get that attacker out of that environment. Scoping the environment, identifying what the attacker has actually been on, what they've been using, what are their tooling. That takes time to identify. Oftentimes the initial response is, let's just kick them out. Let's get them out of there. If you do that before it's appropriately scoped, the attacker will still be there. They have likely embedded something in your environment that they can persist with and let you see those other things that are a little more obvious. When I worked on breaches, it was more about identifying a few different ways to detect the malicious code that they were using, which is not off the shelf, all custom, and being able to walk through and figure out what those were and what are the activities and behavior in the environment that ties to that attacker sort of behavior and activity. What's interesting is they will shift that over time if they see that you're getting too close to what they're trying to do, and actually get them evicted and get them out of that environment.
Yeah, so let's also talk about tone here. I think tone is really important when you know saying anything publicly about a breach. And so one of my pet peeves is too often I see companies trying to minimize it. Obviously they don't want to scare their investors, their shareholders, but at the same time, it's just it's a bad look to say, oh, it only affected 300 customers, or to say it was only a third party, that we shared all your data with, that got hacked. It wasn't us. Like, we were really secure. It was this third party that we chose to give all your data to. It sounds like you're trying to weasel out of responsibility for it, or you're trying to minimize the impact and the damage that has been done to some customers, and it's just not appreciated. I think you have to be humble. You have to be transparent about the fact that it was a failure. You have to accept responsibility, even if it is a third party. That's still your name attached to it. You chose that third party. It was your job to do due diligence on them. Treat it as if them getting hacked was you getting hacked. I think is the proper way to set that tone.
Yeah. So let me ask another question then, Adrian. In business school, they teach crisis comms. They don't really teach it, right? They don't teach it to you in depth, but they give you the high level TLDR of crisis comms. Your CEO gets caught doing something illegal, drugs downtown or something, and gets arrested. Like, how do you handle that kind of scenario, right? Like pure business crisis comms. How is a breach crisis comm different, or is there any difference between traditional crisis comm and breach crisis comms? The only thing that comes to my mind is the disclosure of information that could lead to further attacks or further issues obviously has to be very much a concern and taken care of. But the traditional crisis comms almost falls in place perfectly here.
Yeah, you hire Olivia Pope, right?
I think the only difference are the details, right? It's very much like any other crisis comms. The Streisand effect is real. and yeah, you handle it like anything else. Obviously, the fact that it's a cyber attack, a security related attack, affects how you report it and what those details are. But I think overall, the pros and cons, good crisis comms isn't any different from this, as in the whatever version of it that they teach in business school.
Yeah, and I mean,
CEO doing drugs is a very interesting and specific example. Is that the is that what they teach?
Honestly, I was going to jump
MBA school.
No, I was gonna jump to your CEO gets caught with a prostitute, and I thought that would be inappropriately to bring up on this podcast. So I tried to dumb it down, and the first thing that came to mind was CEO doing drugs, and I was like, well, that doesn't work either, but I got to say it. So
yeah, my brain filled in the rest when you said downtown doing drugs. I was like, he left out hookers.
That's where I was going, and I'm like, God, maybe that's inappropriate. Maybe I should put the filter on. But no. I looked up real quickly, like the traditional crisis comms plan, right? Detailed plan, purpose of the plan, activation criteria, procedures, crisis comms team, who's in it, who acts as spokesperson, will there be more than one, who fields media calls, et cetera, et cetera. What are the key messages? Identify the cause of the crisis, provide a brief description of what happened, a timetable for future plans, communicate compassion for victims of the crisis, provide suggestions for protection if appropriate. It's literally the same exact playbook for a breach protection or a breach communication.
Yeah, and that compassion and empathy, I think, is key. Like if your goal of the crisis comms is to reassure customers, to try and avoid loss of customers or loss of investor shareholder trust, trust of the board. If you're the CEO and trying to keep your job, there have been a lot of these cases where part of the executive team gets the boot after an event like this. So it's I think empathy is kind of key to this.
Yeah, I agree. There's got to be a conciliatory tone, and responsibility. Taking responsibility is one of the most important things. I mean, we've seen it with celebrities saying something dumb. They have to come out. They do apology tour. they're coached really well on what to say. It's got to feel genuine. It has to feel like it comes from the heart. It's got to feel like they are trying to accept responsibility for their actions and not pawning it off on someone else. The old way of going, well, I'm sorry that you were upset, like that sort of thing. That's not really an apology. Or I just want to apologize. That's not an apology. It's we made a mistake. We accept responsibility for these things that we did, that we chose to do. We're going to do better. Here's how we're going to do better. And I think that's the other thing that helps build confidence is we made this mistake. We've learned from this. This is an older method of how we were doing it, or we forgot about this old development system or server that was still connected. We are, using this new inventory management system, which practically no one does very well as inventory management. So we're going to use this, and then we're going to do this, and then this is what we're looking to do, and we want to keep your trust and we value as a customer and moving down that path. And I think that's the appropriate way to do it. But it is a balancing act because there are certain things that from a legal standpoint, once you say, you can't take that back out of, you can't close that back into the box, get that genie back into the bottle. So there is very much a balance to it. I mean, transparency is good, but you want to make sure you don't get into a situation where you accept or open up more liability than what you need to in that situation, where it's very important to have a solid team involved in that communication, drafting the communication, making sure it's appropriate. So that way you strike the right balance of ensuring that it is a message that is read by the consumer or whoever the customer is, and they go, I got it, I understand. This is what the issue is. I understand the extent of it. I know how it affects me personally. I know what you're doing about it. And so many of the times, like as a consumer, using whatever products that we tend to use or services that are cloud services, we end up with a free year of identity monitoring. Like that's helpful. Maybe $5 off the product that they have next year. That's not helpful. So it can feel very tone deaf, but there's definitely ways to ensure that the messaging is written well. And I don't know, maybe ChatGPT can help draft some of these now and say, hey, chatbot, go ahead and write a letter. My company was breached and some consumer records were exposed. With empathy, yes, with empathy, and throw in a quote by a famous leader like JFK.
Yeah, welcome to layoff writing 101, as we've seen for the last 3-4 months.
Yes, yes,
yep. Yeah, I think so. Another important point here, there's a few points I want to touch on real quick. One of those, if you're a public company, you're probably going to have to put out an 8K. And that language is going to be very different than maybe the language you want to use for your customers. In a lot of cases, I've seen companies reuse that same language. They post to their blog exactly what they post to the 8K, which is I don't think is appropriate language. Like what's appropriate for the SEC and what's appropriate for to give your customers confidence is if you can make it work for both, great. But I don't think there's anything wrong with having two different versions of that notification. And also, the other thing is it's not just going to be one notification. When Rackspace got hit a couple months ago because they didn't patch Exchange, they were putting out notifications. No, it's not alleged anymore. Their post-mortem, they say, yeah, it was exactly what you thought it was. It was that patch, that patch that Kevin Beaumont said, hey, you want to install this as soon as possible? We didn't install it.
Yeah, managing Exchange is tough. Please don't manage Exchange anymore. Just move to the cloud. And that's what people did. Rackspace had the Exchange in their cloud. So
they killed the product.
Even Rackspace says that we can't manage Exchange. Yeah, we can't manage Exchange. Go to Exchange Online with Microsoft 365. Let Microsoft manage their product. That's very telling.
And the whole, right, but the other point here was the frequency, and that part of Rackspace's company culture is fanatical customer support. They say, and even when they had no new news to update, they would update something just so that you knew that, hey, this is still something we're working on. We're still trying to recover your data. because it took them a while to recover people's mailboxes, but it looked like they eventually got just about everybody's data back to them, and just about everybody back up and running. Even though it was not on their product anymore, it was most likely on Microsoft 365. But I think it's a very good example of how to handle a breach. I think Rackspace did a lot of things right, and a few things wrong. I think the main thing wrong was deciding not to patch. I don't know how they came to that conclusion. They were trying to use the easily available URL rewrite mitigation, which people in the public knew was not that hard to evade. And then it took them way too long to say whether or not any of that data was stolen. So coming from them, everything about their response was, we're trying to get your data back. We're trying to make sure you're up and running. But that was like 30,000 small businesses emails. Like, did any of those leak? Yeah. Are we going to see any of those get leaked and published by attackers? Are those organizations going to be getting individually ransomed? Folks threatening to leak those emails and all that correspondence that got stolen, or did anything get stolen? We didn't know, and they waited way too long to answer that question.
Yeah, as someone who's worked breaches again and worked Exchange, old school Exchange admin here, going back to Exchange 4.0, and then 5 and 5.5 and so on and so forth. The one thing that we focused on was dial tone. Getting the system up and running so it could accept email and process email. The next step after that was restoring databases, getting things up and running so mail was accessible and available. Getting that migrated over to Microsoft 365, that's a big lift, big effort. So definitely kudos to them. I'm sure they spent a lot of sleepless nights and long weekends getting that going. But from the attacker side, putting on my attacker hat, yes, if I had access to Exchange at that level, I would be pulling every mailbox of interest from every customer out there. I would probably enumerate every domain that was out there that was available, and start pulling mail as quickly as possible, keyword searching and looking for what I could find. And if they had access, then it is very likely that they did that. I don't know. But I would expect as an attacker with that level of access into the Exchange system, setting up a lot of persistence in order to continue and persist, changing permissions so that they can get back in with whatever they need to, even with the patch being deployed. Exchange can be tough to manage, and its permissions are just kind of spider web in throughout Active Directory. If you have Exchange, you have Active Directory. So there is an AD environment there somewhere in Rackspace that was managing this, and the attackers would have moved through there and seen what else they can have access to. Identified titles. Titles are often in there as well, and so looking for CEO, CFO. All of the C-level executives, as well as security folks, as well as the contracts folks, anything that would be interesting, pulling email from those. That's what attackers do, and it's very likely that is what could have been done, but I can't speak to what was actually done.
All right, and I think that's all the time that we have for this discussion today. I think this is a great discussion. It's one I've been wanting to have for a while. We will continue to touch on individual incidents as they occur, as they come up, and maybe we'll start rating some of these breaches. Maybe we'll find some way to put together a scoring on how well these companies are doing in their responses. But stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to cover the latest enterprise security news.
The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. And now for part one of the Enterprise Security Weekly news. Check out securityweekly.com/ESW303 if you want to follow along as we go through the news or for links to the articles that we're covering. All right, and see what we've got here. Only a few fundings this week, but a few odd ones. So we have two cases where cybersecurity companies that were originally better known maybe back in like 2015 timeframe. At least that's when I heard a lot of hype about both Spider Oak and Hypori. Spider Oak actually goes back quite a bit further than that. Spider Oak was, I think they actually beat Dropbox to market in the enterprise file sync and share market when we started seeing, this would have been before OneDrive, before Google Drive existed. I think Box was one of the first ones to market. And these guys were very early with a file sync share backup style solution. And they were always the more secure option, focused a lot more on end-to-end security and things like that than other folks here. You as the customer, you could own the encryption keys to your data, so that Spider Oak couldn't actually view your data, which was fairly unique back then. And they've kind of pivoted to this outer space. Like when I say space here, I mean like leaving Earth's orbit. It's one of the strangest product pitches I've seen, or product pivots that I've seen. Any thoughts here, Tyler?
Yeah,
I hear you giggling.
No, I'm giggling, man, because we always hear of cyberspace, like, oh, we pivoted into this or that in cyberspace. Not we pivoted this to space, like literally space, outer space. Introducing Orbit Secure. That's the name of their product, Orbit Secure. Keep everything on a need-to-know basis in Orbit Secure, designed for hybrid and multi-party mission environments, embedding security into your commands and data. I have no idea where this thing is going.
Beyond cloud, it's Orbit.
I love it. That's a great tagline. Blasting beyond the cloud.
Oh, the best is if you go to their website, there's actually a screenshot of one of their talking heads. I can't see who it is, but one of their talking heads on Fox News.
See, everyone else is at the cloud level. We're at the space level. We're up here. They're down here at 10. We're up here at 11.
Cyber threats pose a danger to U.S. ability to wage war is the topic. Woo! Investing in space, digital orbit danger.
So we're going to have some data centers in space, I guess.
Cyber in space.
Orbit Secure. I love it.
Yeah, they have a senior VP of space, a space advisory board. Like they've really pivoted into it. And it's interesting.
Wow.
I guess, like, how big of a niche do you need to survive as a security company, right? Like, guys, it looks like we're not going to make it. Find us a niche to pivot into.
That's it. Trimark is spinning up a space division tomorrow.
Can I be the CEO?
I guess space has got to be big enough for at least, a handful of security companies to specialize in, right?
Bro, space is infinite.
And it's
Not as a market.
literally a growing market. It just gets bigger every year.
It's literally an infinite market, man. Come on.
As the universe expands. Wow.
Exactly. And once we identify
certainly
the
it's
other
got to be a
people out
growing
there,
market.
you know, aliens, the market will grow even more. There's other inhabited planets. They need cybersecurity too, probably.
I mean, think about it. At any given moment, there's what, like 8 people in space? That's bound to grow.
Yeah.
Oh man. Does your TAM only include Earthlings? Only include humans? Wow. The next one is a little bit less ambitious. So this is more of like a marketing pivot. So Hypori makes what they used to call virtualized mobile or virtual mobile infrastructure. The idea is that you have a disposable, secure virtual Android instance running in the cloud somewhere that you use on your phone instead of using the actual mobile OS that's on your phone. So I guess I can see some of the advantages here. That maybe you have data that's very sensitive, corporate data that you don't want to be on somebody's personal BYOD device. So you only give them access to it through this, virtual Android instance that's running in AWS or some cloud somewhere, right? And so they've kind of, the pivot here is they're now pitching it as zero trust BYOD.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It sounds like an extension of what Citrix has been doing for a while, where you basically have a terminal window into an environment, or even, I guess the technology is more akin to what is being done. Tyler, earlier you mentioned gamifying, so effectively it sounds like they're gamifying workloads. Because the Nintendo Switch, for example, is able to run certain games that are not exactly made for the Nintendo Switch because it has a lower power processor than, say, an Xbox or a PlayStation. But now those level games can be played on a Nintendo because the game itself is actually rendered and runs in a cloud environment, cloud workload, but then just streamed and shown on the Switch. So it sounds very similar to that sort of situation. It's very interesting. I'd be curious about
cloud gaming has been around since the mid-2000s.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting conceptually, but as an investor, I look at this and go, the mobile security market never amounted to much when I was looking at it 10 years ago. I don't see it being anything today. And who really is going to want to run a separate work component on their device? I remember running 10 years ago on early Android devices where you had to switch from like work mode to personal mode or whatever. And I think you still have to do that on some Android, but it's built into the operating system. Why would I even mess with anything like this? It just doesn't seem like a logical, at least from an investment standpoint, a logical investment to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Lookout is the only mobile security company that really made it big, and I think hit unicorn status and made it out of that.
Yeah, goodness knows why. I mean, I don't remember their numbers back in the day. I was pretty close with their founders early on, or at least one of their founders. I still am a little bit, still friends with them. But I don't know. I don't remember what their metrics and growth rate were and things like that. But they hit a $1 billion valuation when $1 billion valuation actually meant something. So I'm assuming it was a reasonable level of adoption.
Yeah, I think they were. So I mean, there aren't many security companies anymore that do both enterprise and consumer, but Lookout definitely did both. So I think that might have helped them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and both of these fundings, both of these are companies who had started, the VC funding process, and then later on restarted it. So I think both Spider Oak and Hypori have both had multiple Series A's, multiple Series B's now, as they kind of, I guess they cleared the cap table, restarted the whole process. I'm not sure exactly how that works.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't touch that. I wouldn't touch a mobile sec play right now with a 10-foot pole.
All right. Let's see. The copy of the stories I'm looking at jumps from number 2 to number 8. And I know we've got some acquisitions here. So Tom Bravo picked up Magnet Forensics, which I'm not terribly familiar with, but they were worth $1.34 billion. So they're a big deal to somebody.
Yeah, wow. It's crazy how there can be $1 billion plus valuation, almost $2 billion plus valuation cybersecurity company that I'm not intimately familiar with. It seems very bizarre, but it is Canadian, right? European, or not European, Canadians in Europe, where I come from. It's a Canadian company worth 1.8 billion Canadian, so a $1.3 billion deal. I think, if I recall correctly, they're doing cybersecurity threat investigation kind of stuff, digital forensics.
Oh, okay.
Which
Man,
is,
I can claim COVID brain. What's your excuse, Tyler?
I don't have an excuse. I'm just dumb. That's pretty straightforward. But no, I think it's similar in play to some of the digital forensics firms, consulting style-y firms that are getting large valuations in the U.S. now too, potentially like an Arctic Wolf or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a big deal. Interesting to see the PE companies are still very active. I don't think we've seen them slow down at all. And in this market, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more. It's not often we have more acquisition stories than funding stories, but this week is one of those weeks. So
welcome to the compression of 2023, Adrian. Now is the time to buy distressed assets that can't raise money again.
Yep. Vanta picked up a company called TrustPage. I don't know a whole lot about TrustPage, but Vanta, I believe, does they help you accelerate and automate part of your SOC 2 and other compliance and regulatory initiatives. So
Vanta is a compliance play for sure. I can't. We're running off of a bit of an austerity system here, and I'm having trouble finding the link to that one. But Vanta is most definitely a automated compliance play where they collect all of the asset information around compliance required to get SOC 2, to get HIPAA, to get PCI, insert your framework here, and then automate exposure of your gaps with regards to getting the certifications. And then when your auditors can come in, they can say, oh, you have Vanta? Oh, here's the link too. You've got Vanta. We know that you can get with Vanta. We trust the results of that data. Now we know where your gaps are, and we can quickly get you to your compliance levels faster. So, pretty strong solution.
It looks like TrustPage is very similar. It looks kind of like I'm trying to remember the name of the company. There's a bunch of companies out there that will automate your SIGs and your RFPs. Maybe kind of like a CyberGRX. It looks like they aim to help you automate and manage your security reviews and your questionnaires. So that's an obvious plug-in for Vanta to have there.
Yeah.
Bitwarden extends passwordless leadership with their acquisition of, what was the name of the company? Passwordless.dev is the name of the company. So it sounds like a development framework for building in different MFA, FIDO2, WebAuthn, hardware keys, YubiKeys, that kind of thing, Windows Hello, Face ID into your products.
Yeah. No, I've been a big fan of these kinds of technologies, like especially if they're open source, finding ways to get rid of the damn password. First and forever. If we can get rid of passwords permanently and move to more biometric now, especially now that we all have handheld devices. We've had this conversation 100 times on the show. Now that we've got these devices, we 100% should be using those as authentication components. Everybody keeps them sitting on their desk 24/7. So I like these kinds of technologies. These are exciting technologies. And as soon as we get to a world where I don't have to enter another password, the happier I'm going to be.
Agreed. FIDO2 is a much stronger authentication method than even password plus MFA. So it's definitely the right way to go.
All right, there's a couple rounds of layoffs here. We're not going to, it's kind of just depressing, so we're not going to cover those.
just a couple, Adrian? Just a couple?
Yeah, well, in security, just a couple. Once you broaden it to tech, it's massive, right? Like we've heard about, half the people I know have been laid off, I feel like.
Yeah. This is not just a couple. I think it's worth discussing actually as kind of a touch point, not necessarily to dwell on the doom and gloom of the layoffs that are occurring. But I'm a member of a wonderful society, which I will plug here, called the Cybersecurity Marketers Society, which is a fantastic Slack group. And in that Slack group is a kind of a job board posting and a couple of spots where people can post looking for jobs wanted kinds of roles. And it feels like literally every other day it's another cybersecurity layoff. This is not a 1-2 punch in cybersecurity. This is a massive body blow. We're seeing significant number of employees laid off. There's if you are a reader of Clint Gibler's TLDR Sec, the one that came out I think today or yesterday, just came out within the last 24 hours. He's got a link in the top there to a cybersecurity jobs board and layoff tracker kind of thing. Definitely recommend you take a peek at that. It is pretty big. So if you're out there and you're a listener and you are looking for a job because you've been affected and laid off, look at that list. It's a great place to start. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and DM. I'm happy to make introductions where I can as well. But it's a real problem we're seeing in cyber right now.
Yeah, and also Mike Prevette, who runs Return on Security and has the security funded newsletter, actually just started a separate jobs newsletter as well. So that's another one you can sign up for. But yeah, here in the list this week, I had Citrix and HashiCorp and Forescout are all either security companies or partially security companies who have done some rounds of layoffs.
You know what I do find interesting about those names? Not Citrix and Hashi so much, but the Forescout one says that they fired 60% of their Israeli R&D staff. That to me is shocking, because usually the Israeli R&D stuff is a significant kind of high growth scenario over there. And I'm wondering if we're going to see increased impact in Israel, given the investment, overinflated investment really that has gone into Israel in the last 2 to 3 years, 3 to 4 years. I wonder if there'll be an Israeli reckoning coming down second half of this year on the back of the impacts to like what really is a global cybersecurity market.
Yeah, and that's it for my layoff stories this week, though. Sure, we're going to still keep seeing some of that fallout. When do you think, Tyler, we'll stop seeing layoffs there? I think we saw 5,000. According to my database, at least 5,000 layoffs last year, and we're already probably a good 1,000 into this year.
Oh, I think that's underestimating for sure. I can get out the crystal ball, Adrian, and polish it up and tell you exactly when it's going to happen. But pretty much the only thing you're guaranteed if I do that is that I'm going to be wrong. I think the general idea is the market's down. The market's going to remain down. And until the Fed, I've said this before, and I know this isn't a macroeconomic podcast, but until the Fed finally gives up on pushing the nominal interest rates through the roof, we're going to see continued pressure on high tech, high growth, high risk investments like everything in tech, but specifically cybersecurity is no different. Now, a lot of investors out there say cybersecurity is resilient; they can make it through, and yeah, they're going to do better than like high tech, high growth food ordering companies, right? Which are going to collapse faster. Right. But it's still not immune to the compression of the change in interest rates. I teach a class at the University of North Carolina MBA school, and I had a class last night, and I said specifically, what is the one thing that has allowed blitz scaling companies in the last 3 to 4 years to flourish and scale and become massive? And really what it is free resources, infinite resources. And when you have infinite resources, you can scale as fast as you want because there's no downside. You can always go back to the well for more. Well, the resources have dried up. You can't go back to the well anymore. And now you better damn well make your business an efficient business.
So this seems like a good point to jump to story number 10. Why to start up a startup in a bad economy by Paul Graham. I thought this was good timing to resurface this. So this essay is actually from 2008.
Wow. I'm going to deep dive this this post. I remember seeing it because I remember thinking how it was so poorly formatted back when I saw it originally. But even now looking at it, I want to deep dive this because I think at the end of the day, what is the saying? Diamonds are forged under pressure, right? And I think we're in another one of those scenarios. I'm reading it again. Chamath Palihapitiya from All In Podcast actually just wrote a post yesterday on why now is going to be the next generation of brand new, amazing Google level startups, right? Your big monster style startups to come out. They're going to be born today and tomorrow, right? In the very near future. And the reality is because you have to build in a resource constrained world. And when you're building in a resource constrained world, it's harder to do. And if you can be successful in that environment, when the resources become cheaper or potentially infinite, like they were for the last 8 or so years, you can shoot through the moon. You can go right up, and tackle just about anything. So, it's kind of the TLDR scenario.
Also, how much talent has just been freed up by the companies
Absolutely.
most likely to suck up all the talent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Talent just 100%, a huge amount of talent is now 100% available and ready to work at decreased prices with, instead of employee-friendly work modes where, if you don't have the latest and greatest coffee, I'm not going to come work for you. We're now in a situation where the employer holds all control. And so they can get great workers at relatively reasonable rates. And this is where new leaders are born. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, AI-backed systems becomes the new frontier.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be a ton of companies, I imagine, created by, just the layoffs that Meta, Google, and Microsoft have done. These are really smart people who've been working together for a long time. They were let go at the same time. A lot of them are going to be thinking, hey, now's a good time to start something new.
And a lot of them, not all of them, but a portion of them, I don't know, let's 5%, 10%, have a nest egg, right? These are folks that have lived out in Silicon Valley making $1 million a year, some of these engineers, right? And just banking it, setting it aside. And now they're sitting on significant money going, okay, now I got the bank to bankroll myself to build something new.
Yep. Ironically, the next story on the list is why there are so many cybersecurity vendors. It's an essay by Ross Hallaluk, I think is how you say his name. That could be wrong. I'm sorry, Ross, if I said it wrong. But why there are so many vendors, what it leads to, and where we go from here. So, while I think we're going to see some acquisitions, certainly as everybody agrees on valuations, which is story number 13, talking about the reality check of, hey, you're not a unicorn anymore. Once we see everybody come to terms with that, we might see the market shrink a little, but it's going to grow right again. Just like what we're talking about. I think we're going to see a bunch of new companies born out of these layoffs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read this article in detail. Ross is a hell of an author. He's a great journalist. He's doing a lot of really cool stuff. So if you haven't subscribed to Venture and Security, definitely go subscribe to it. This particular article is very interesting. I agree with about 80% of it, but the key thing I agree with is that companies in cyber don't fail at the same rate as other industries. As an investor, it's one of the reasons why I put money into cyber. One, I know cyber. It's been my whole career for 25 years, so I try to focus on investing in cyber. But two, I agree with them. I don't think they fail. I don't think they go to zero nearly as much as other industries. There's always somebody ready to pick up a smart piece of IP at a break-even cost to the invested capital. So if you give somebody, a grand total of $10 million, they're not able to turn it into a product that can be bought. But hey, that might be a component that plugs into a larger platform or something like that. $10 million is a nothing acquisition for these large cyber companies, or, it just makes sense that they just don't fail at the same rate as your next scooter riding company, right? So those just go to zero with a much higher frequency rate. So because of that, everybody who has a modicum of some kind of unique technology idea turns it into a company because they know there's a smaller percent of it going to zero. The investors are ready to put money behind it and say, hey, worst case scenario, we break even on this thing in a few years if we can't get it to market.
Yep. Very true. Let's see. So China's trying to build an infosec industry, and I think it's interesting. They're just going to announce. I guess that's what China does. They announce they're going to build something, and then they build it.
I guess. I mean, different regime, different style.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with the government behind it, it's highly likely to happen. Already, the cybersecurity market in China has grown quite a bit. I don't know how big it is now in relation to other things, but yeah, also Korea, Japan. We've seen more and more cybersecurity companies coming out of Asia in general.
Yeah, again, it comes down to resources, right? It's like playing Sims or playing the old game like Civ, right? Civilization. If you have infinite resources, you can build whatever the hell you want. If the Chinese government's willing to give a bunch of infinite resource scenario to a bunch of intelligent cyber researchers and people to build companies, off they go. They're going to go be successful. Those companies will be born. Will they be efficient? Will they return a lot of capital? That's TBD. But the technology will be built.
Yeah. All right, let's see what else we've got here. So I've been very, very interested to follow Basecamp 37 Signals here. They've been making a big deal about stepping out of the cloud and just running they're not running their own data centers. They're using a colo facility. But basically their argument is if you don't have crazy, unpredictable growth, you don't necessarily need cloud scale, and cloud is actually a lot more expensive than just running your own hardware. And I'm very interested to see this experiment play out. They're being very open with their spending, and in fact, the item that we have linked in the news here has specific dollar amounts, how much they spend on cloud, and they break it down by the different services, relational databases, OpenSearch, EC2, ELB, CloudWatch. They break down all the costs for you, and they say in a year, once they've moved Hey, which is their email service, out of the cloud and onto their own systems, they're going to share what kind of savings they get from doing that.
And you asked me for a crystal ball prediction, Adrian, what's your crystal ball on this one?
My crystal ball on this one is that so they've never been fully cloud. I don't think so. Hey has been cloud from the beginning because they didn't know how it was going to go, and they didn't want to pull a Dollar Shave Club and get massive response to a new service and not be able to serve it. I if you remember when Dollar Shave Club launched, they put together a video specifically to go viral. It did go viral, and the next joke that came up is that Dollar Shave Club was using dollar hosting services because nobody could sign up for the product, and it was definitely a lesson for them and for anybody watching. And when they same thing happened with Hey. They got way more response. I think they signed up like 1 million people or just something crazy in the first month, way more than they were anticipating. So it was good for them to be in the cloud then. But Basecamp, their other product, their product management product, has never been fully in the cloud. So they never lost that skill set. So my crystal ball here is yeah, they're going to save a bunch of money doing this, but they might be better positioned to do that than most other companies. If somebody's just 100% born in the cloud, I think it's going to be a little bit tougher for them to attempt something like this.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the right skill set.
I think this is pretty interesting, and certainly I've heard of some companies that have gone to the cloud and pulled back again. There are scenarios where the savings just aren't there in cloud. And so when you're looking at cloud services and figuring that out, if you're just using straight infrastructure, effectively instances like you would have on-prem in VMware or Hyper-V or something else, the on-prem or even a colo or rack type situation may be more favorable than cloud. Cloud definitely can be more expensive depending on your scenario and what you need from a processor and storage perspective. So it definitely is not always cheaper, and that's why it is important to run the numbers and figuring it out. Certainly there are a lot of companies where the executive said, let's go to the cloud. Everyone's going to the cloud. We got to do it also. and without doing that ROI on it and that analysis to really understand where our expenses going. And it sounds like Basecamp did that. So kudos to them for really drilling into the numbers and figuring out what makes the most sense for them, especially with the current economy and where things are. Makes a lot of sense to do it now.
Yeah, I love when people do experiments in the public space here. So I'm going to be really interested to see that, and we will revisit that in a year when they publish the numbers from this experiment. All right, I think I'm going to jump to our squirrel story here, where Microsoft has made these enormous investments in open AI, and people weren't. I think people kind of scratching their head at it, saying, "Okay, it's a weird place to put $10 billion." Now they're not scratching their head as much. Now Microsoft is putting it into Office apps. They're putting it into Edge, into Bing. All of a sudden, Microsoft is looking like a genius now that ChatGPT-3 is out, and people are finding all kinds of commercial and profitable uses for it. It's so the squirrel story here is Google. Let me just read the headline. The headline's funny. Panicked Google to unveil over 20 AI products, including a pixel wallpaper maker. So, of course, Google's been pouring money into AI also. It's not just been Microsoft, but they haven't really. Google doesn't seem to have a great product strategy, right? Like they do Google Stadia, which is a cloud gaming effort. They even had their own first party studio. They didn't pump enough money into it for it to be successful. So, people have been predicting from day one it was going to close down, and they shut it down. And Google's got all this AI stuff, just sitting around, all this research that they've done. And, everybody's seen them playing with some of this stuff, everything from Google Glass to self-driving cars. And I don't know, they just haven't done anything really interesting, all that interesting with it yet, aside from, maybe the Google Voice Assistant is a good example of their AI technology that a lot of people have in their hands that works really well. But yeah, all this stuff with Microsoft's investments in ChatGPT has them suddenly scrambling and trying to make their own AI investments relevant overnight.
Yeah,
absolutely. It makes sense. Go ahead, Tyler.
I was going to say the whole Chat GPT thing hasn't freaked out, man. Has Sundar freaked out? He doesn't know how to handle it. And the funny thing is, if you actually read the article, it's 20 AI products coming over the course of the next year. So it's not like they've had these in the bag and they got freaked out. Like, oh, we better get them out to market faster. Like, these are coming next year. They could be kicking off these projects now for all we know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a response. The article says that the ChatGPT system and others like it certainly show true competition against the Google search engine, which wasn't there before. Lots of companies have tried to challenge Google in the space and just haven't been able to unseat them. Certainly, there's probably some additional factors as to why that is actually an issue, from their advertising network to other components. It all kind of ties in and keeps you in that Google universe. But yeah, Google's strategy from a market product standpoint has been kind of inconsistent, to say the least. Killing off products that seem to be useful, that people seem to like. Other products stick around for a while and then just kind of languish and then get killed off. Shifting strategy to AI now. The article says that they're going to streamline and make it faster, where these products that leverage AI can actually get out the door more quickly. Which certainly has me concerned, because there should be some guardrails around AI. We should have some good understanding of what it is, what it's doing, and we shouldn't just be throwing things against the wall to see what sticks. So hopefully Google figures that out and is able to do so in a way that's responsible.
I wonder how many AI researchers they just laid off and are scrambling to rehire right now. All right. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be back in a few moments with part 2 of this week's Enterprise Security Weekly News.
managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more.
Of the Enterprise Security Weekly news. Again, you can check out securityweekly.com/ESW303 if you want to follow along as we go through them. Check out the links to the articles that we're covering. All right. So I kind of separated things out where part one of the news, we mostly covered market stuff. So security market, layoffs, new companies, that kind of thing. And the second part, we get a little bit more technical here. Get into some non-market related stuff, some trends. There's a lot of trends we've got here. There's a few essays, some interesting stuff to cover here. And since we kind of wrapped up talking about ChatGPT and AI, I guess it's appropriate that the first thing we cover here is Orca Security using ChatGPT in their product. And in more than just a token way, I think there's a lot of ways somebody could kind of have like a token use for ChatGPT here, but I believe they're using it to auto render the remediation guidance for issues that Orca Security finds, which Orca Security is a cloud security tool. Will tell you, hey, this is insecure configuration. And ChatGPT is telling you how to fix it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, it's just a Google search, right? I mean, in reality, you're treating ChatGPT, you're saying, hey, ChatGPT, tell me how to fix problem X. The only difference is you're giving it a natural language version of what problem X is. It's going out on the internet, pulling together, being smart about it, analyzing what's out there and saying, here's the best way to fix it. And, I've played quite a bit with ChatGPT recently to try to figure out how to automate and see if I could automate some of the projects that I'm doing on the side. And it doesn't always work perfect, but it's good enough. And I think, if there's an 80-90% hit rate here, I think companies could be in great shape just using this as kind of that first layer of analysis and response. I also see this being a good fit for first level SOC triage of problems. Ask ChatGPT how to do something. It's going to come back with a great answer for you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. One of the biggest.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Chad.
One of the biggest issues with SOC is identifying what the SOP is. You get an event that goes to an alert. What do you do with that? And identifying, documenting, keeping that up to date. That's a big challenge. If this can fulfill that need, then that's great.
Yeah. So the one challenge I see here is if ChatGPT was only trained up through a certain time, what if the remediation guidance it gives you is out of date? Like, for example, one of the things we actually experimented with this a little bit back at my previous role, and one of the things I noticed is Google changed how things worked in Google Cloud. So the instructions you would give somebody to go change a setting in Google Cloud in 2021 might be different than the instructions you would give them in 2023. So I wonder if ChatGPT might be giving outdated guidance here in some cases.
And I think
just because
the short answer to that, Adrian, is maybe, just like anything else in cyber. But I think the way to correctly do this is to actually use OpenAI on the back end, and you're essentially creating your own front end to it, and you can teach the AI system over time. So let's just say that we use the 2021 base learning knowledge as the answer set. It's in beta mode. I believe Orca released this in beta mode, not full publicly released, but it's in a beta mode. In which case, there's, I'm going to guess, I don't know this for sure, I haven't looked at the UI, but there's some kind of thumbs up, thumbs down approval to the fix. On the thumbs down ones, they have a human being going in and training the backend, OpenAI backend that they've created to say, no, here's the correct way to do it. And so you fix that last 20% gap over time, and it decreases over time.
Okay. I didn't realize that was an option, that you could further train it.
Yeah, you can't really further train Chat GPT as a front end because that's not, I mean, you kind of can, but that's not really what it's intended for. But Chat GPT is an overlay on top of OpenAI, which is the back end system that supports it. That's actually what Microsoft invested $10 billion into is OpenAI, which is the commercial version of that back end system.
Gotcha. Okay. Few new features here. Amazon S3 encrypts new objects by default. Okay. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that encryption does for you. That's kind of like okay, I encrypted the hard drives of the servers in my data center. I mean, that doesn't really. If somebody accesses that system as an authorized user, they're not going to see any encrypted data, right? So, I'm not sure exactly what that buys you, but maybe there's some use cases where that buys you something.
So my understanding. I think
you can.
Go ahead. Go ahead, bud.
I was going to say one of the things that this buys you is you can check the box on vendor risk analysis or assessments when you're filling those out. That yes, we encrypt in transit or at rest. So if using S3 buckets for storage, for transferring data between customers and your company or within your company, and they're encrypted by default, then that allows you to check that box, whereas before you can't. That's one obvious one that my brain jumped to right away.
Yeah, you know what this stops, Adrian? This stops the, oops, I created an S3 bucket out on the internet with no authentication authorization problem, because the data in it is actually encrypted. You can't just dump a mirror image of it and steal it, right? It's actually encrypted. Now, if you have all the APIs and access to it, and it's pulling data back in a decrypted fashion, that's a different problem. But many times the S3 buckets are sitting out there just for straight up farming, allowing you to farm data straight out of them. And you're muted. We're going to make that cat sound every time you do that, Adrian. We're going to go mew mew.
I'm glad I have you guys with me because I was just not understanding the use cases here. So no that's all that makes sense. Next new feature is an interesting one. If you've ever explored canarytokens.org or the Thinks Canary product, you know that they have there's some neat things that you can do with some of their tokens. They've got Slack API key tokens, AWS API key tokens, Word document tokens. And basically, if an attacker touches it or tries to use it, it sends off an alert. You get that alert. They now have a credit card token. They announced it at ShmooCon, I believe. Someone gave a talk at ShmooCon to announce this, and they've got a blog post with it here. Basically, you can leave fake credit card numbers lying around, and if somebody uses them in these places that you've hidden them, now you know that somebody untrustworthy has access to that location.
So
whether that be your phone, your laptop.
I have a question how this works, Adrian, because listen, it's easy to create number expiration in CVCs. Like that's a known algorithm for most credit card types, right? You can bang those out. We can create hundreds of those tomorrow. The question is, are they then creating a back-end system that actually detects the charge occurring as well?
They would have to be partnering with a processor or an issuer. They'd have to be. So I know there's privacy.com, I think it is, has a service where you can create. So this is what I originally thought they were doing. So you can even use, if you're a privacy.com customer, it's really easy to sign up. They basically create these essentially like gift card. You get these fake credit card numbers. You authorize it to use $20, and the most that can ever be stolen from it is $20. And the idea being these are throwaway credit card numbers that you can use in situations where you don't necessarily trust who you're giving access to this credit card number to. So they're virtual credit cards, I think is what they call them. So maybe they teamed up with somebody. I don't understand exactly how they're doing it in the back end. I think I saw they mentioned that they're all Amexes. But I would expect that they all maybe have the same bin, which is something that you have to maybe worry about. If somebody sees that bin, and recognizes it. The BIN being like the first part of the number that tells you what financial institution that it comes from. Could be a way to detect it, but if it's a valid BIN, then you can't necessarily assume it's going to be one of these fake ones. But they've got to be partnering with some kind of processor that notifies them as soon as that transaction goes through.
So I have a couple other questions though. So most systems that I use credit cards for will take one credit card. There's certainly some that allow you to put in like multiple and allow you to have, cascading fallbacks and all that kind of stuff. But most of the SaaS systems are single credit card number, and you remove one and you put a new one in, right? Obviously, you can't put one in there because you can't be charged, right?
Right.
Unless it cascades through where it hits one, and then on the Thinkist side, you actually have it cascade through to your real charge.
Yeah, I don't think that's how it's intended to be used, though. I don't think the idea here is that you find out if Joe's Crab Shack gets breached, because you used that card number only with Joe's Crab Shack. So that's something you could actually use. The privacy.com, and other companies out there have this idea of virtual cards where you could maybe produce a virtual credit card for every vendor that you have. And you're going to get notified as soon as those charges go through. So you could actually do that with some real products today. I think this is more something you would use like any other honey token, where you're actually trying to detect somebody's gotten access to an S3 bucket or something like that. Like you could put this information on fake purchase orders or something like that. Leave those documents laying around. Maybe the fake purchase order is also a PDF or a Microsoft Word doc canary token with the fake honey token credit card inside it. But what you're trying to do is catch attackers, not necessarily in a like a compromised retailer use case, just in a general, I want to know if somebody's hacked my company use case.
I'm looking at it from the wrong side of the coin. I was looking at it from the consumer user side of the coin, but in reality, if I own a database of 100,000 credit cards, I'll sprinkle 5,000 of these through it.
Yeah, no, it's a good example. Yeah, that's one of my favorite examples. Is if you want to know exactly when your database was compromised, this is something I've seen people do where they have fake customers in their databases, and they swap out those fake customers every week. So they not only know which database or whether the database was attacked if somebody leaks part of that database, but they know when it was attacked by when, which week that fake customer data was used as you rotate through your fake data.
Yeah, I mean, the only problem with credit cards, though, is how often do we see dumps out there on the dark web that have been sitting there for 6 months or a year, and you don't see any actual compromise until somebody goes through and starts burning through all of them. A dump could sit there for months at a time before it gets actually used.
Yeah, it's true. Yep. Definitely true. In fact, we've seen that in many cases where the time between the data being leaked and the data being stolen is years in some cases. Mm-hmm. Obviously, with credit card numbers, they have expiration dates, so that data is only good for so long.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, the cost is low to throw a handful of these tokens into your database, and maybe the return is high.
That's exactly it. With the cost as low as free, why wouldn't you? Right? Exactly. Why wouldn't you do it? All right. Leonard Koopman left Graylog to work on Enzyme full time. For those that don't know, Enzyme is like a wireless intrusion prevention system. I guess is one way of putting it. Maybe not in the classic sense of a wireless intrusion prevention system, but it's an open source project that allows you to basically turn a Raspberry Pi into a wireless security system that will let you know if somebody's trying to use a Wi-Fi pineapple or other techniques to try and trick you into connecting to an evil access point, for to give one example. It looks like he's trying to turn it into a business.
Sounds pretty cool. I don't know much about Enzyme, but certainly understand Graylog, and it sounds like a great approach and direction.
Yeah, what I liked about that article is the excitement that he gets out of it. Right? When you read the article, he's talking about how excited he is to try something new, and you can see 10 years of building a business to 125 employees is a slog. That can be draining, and he's just ready for something new. So good for him. I'm excited to see him do it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's. I've seen some attempts in the consumer market for this. I have a Thing box at home. I've bought many gadgets over the years that have tried to be some kind of like consumer security device that you actually put on your network at home that lets you know when bad stuff happens. And my Thing box actually does have some wireless defenses. It'll let you know if somebody's trying to spoof your home network nearby, for example. And it also gives you an inventory of all the devices on your network and does some cool things there. And it was $100. It comes in really handy. It's a neat device. It lets me know when a new device shows up on my network, and basically gives me a choice: allow it on the network, or basically de-auth the crap out of it. And well, it's not actually de-authing. It's using network means to not allow that device to talk in my network. Basically, ARP route poisoning to knock it off the network. But yeah, neat device. I think maybe there's some space for consumer security devices out there, but I don't know if Koopman's looking to go the enterprise route or consumer route or both. But I guess we'll see. All right, let's see here. Security pros say third parties are increasingly the cause of cybersecurity incidents. I don't think you need security pros to say that. You just watch the news, and we've just seen a lot of those. So earlier today,
we saw
I was
that with the
talking to
Target breach.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it goes all the way back to Fazio Mechanical was the name of the third party. And the funny thing about that is the reports I've seen, they're not 100% sure how the attackers got into Target, but they think it was through the vendor management system. They had an on-prem vendor management system that was exposed to the public internet, where basically the vendors would all fill out their questionnaires and do their annual vendor maintenance, that Target requires them to fill out and do for compliance. And they said they think it was a vulnerability in that system that actually got the attackers onto the Target network.
Yeah, I like your comment on this. You have a really cool comment on this. It says, "Makes sense. Hack once, pwn many." I've forever been talking about what I call the force multiplier of an attack. If you can, I've been talking about it for over a decade. If you can find a force multiplier on your attack, it's always more powerful. Even if we go back into the 80s and 90s with the Smurf attacks, right? We can send a single ping packet to a broadcast and take down an entire network. That's a force multiplier. So if you supply chain, and the reason why supply chain attacks are so risky and dangerous is if you pop one thing early in the supply chain, it cascades and distributes down to hundreds, thousands of target endpoints, and you get mass compromise, right? Those are the most effective attacks. Attack one, pwn many.
In the Kaseya attack, we saw fourth parties and even fifth parties impacted by the Kaseya breach.
Yeah, we'll definitely see more of these, especially as we see managed service providers attacked and other vendors that have access, that are granted access, that are managing these systems. Because, again, like Tyler said, if you can go after one to then jump to others, that's a lot easier than trying to jump into each of those individually.
Yep. And somewhat related, ransomware revenue drops 40% in 2022. I thought that was it was really, I guess it's not surprising, like we talked about in our previous segment, the first segment we did where we were talking about breach responses. I think more and more companies are aware of ransomware as an issue and have worked out whether or not they're going to pay. And I'm glad to see more people are deciding not to pay.
How do you track this?
So,
how do you actually track it? I said, how do we track it? Do we send survey to all the attackers? How much money did you make this year? Did they pay taxes? Do we ask the IRS? Like, how do we figure it out?
It's on the blockchain. It's all on the blockchain.
Ah, that's true. I hadn't even thought about that. A big chunk of
Yeah,
it
they're
is
probably
on the
monitoring the known attacker wallets that are part of the request.
Yeah, that's valid. Absolutely. I hadn't thought about that. I just was like, what are they doing? Asking how they paid their taxes this year? I mean, like,
Chain analysis. Yeah, basically go look at chain analysis. Yeah, because to get you to pay, they tell you what the wallet address is, and yeah, there are known wallet addresses for certain attack groups. Yeah. Yeah, the same thing that makes ransoming companies possible also makes it much easier for us to track what kind of profits they're making off it, which is kind of the first time in I think cybercrime that we've been able to see that kind of thing clearly. But yeah, it doesn't mean people are getting ransomed less, but it does mean that they're paying it less, which I still see as a positive trend.
two interesting questions I have about this is the cost per record going down then potentially? That's one way of looking at it, right? What is the dollar per compromised record? The other thing I want to know too, and I wrote about this in the Cyber Wide this week. Actually, Rick Holland wrote about it. North Korea and the amount of money North Korea is stealing to prop up. I'm sorry, China, North Korea. I can't remember which one. One of the two of them, I think it's North Korea, was stealing North Korea just did another 100 million last week. We can track all of that probably too, because it's all compromised of Bitcoin. We can actually say quite literally this amount of income went into North Korea or China to prop up their economy.
Yep. No, we absolutely can, and enough to the point to where I've and this really is not my area of expertise, but I've seen some articles where basically we know North Korea's income as a country because in what portion of it they depend on hacking cryptocurrency for, which is bizarre, weird world to live in, right? All right. Next one, I kind of had you in mind for this one, Sean. The did we decide it's pronounced Lars
or layers? I'm sure we're gonna get a message from Chris about that. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah. Have Mr. Nickerson come yell at us if we got that wrong. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Layers Research highlights the top 5 penetration test findings from 2022. This is not surprising for me at all. I'll start with the number 4, which is WannaCry Eternal Blue, which has been around for several years now. That's, I guess, surprising, not surprising that's still available and active on the network. Yeah. I mean, not surprising. Number 1, brute forcing accounts with weak and guessable passwords. That's not surprising at all. To Tyler's point earlier, we need to figure out how to get rid of passwords. A little more complicated in enterprise environments. But moving forward, the technology is coming to us slowly, or at least the technology is available. Getting these systems incorporated and updated so that we can use passwordless is definitely where we need to head. Number 2, Kerberos sting. That doesn't surprise me at all. This is basically a method of capturing a Kerberos service ticket for a service account in Active Directory, taking that offline, and then effectively brute forcing it. Once you're able to open up that ticket, you're able to know what the password is for the service account that's associated with that environment because of how Kerberos works. It's a method that Tim Medine came up with years ago and has been pretty prevalent. It's one of those things that relates and ties to guidance that we've had for years, which is do not use weak passwords and make sure passwords do change over time for your service accounts, or at least set them to something very long and complex. Like it used to be 20 characters. Now I think we're pushing to 30 characters for those plus. Otherwise, they can get brute force. They can get guessed. This is something that attackers are doing all the time. They're checking for Active Directory accounts with Kerberos service principal names, checking to see what the age of those passwords are, and if it's 3, 4, 5, or more years, those are going to be definite targets for them. It doesn't surprise me that that's one of the top 5 penetration test findings that the team over at Lars has. Excessive file system permissions, not surprising at all. File system permissions are often forgotten about, but they are a way to enable anyone on the network to then access that data and pull it down. It's pretty easy to scan through the environment to identify what file shares are available. There's something called distributed file system, or DFS, in most Active Directory environments, where you can get a list of what all those are and then scan through all the file shares within it. Those are typically not well secured. Authenticated user, domain user configuration, so that way people can access what they need to, but very seldom is it tightened up to the level of least permissive access, or the permission around the access of least permission. So that way the people that need it have it, but nobody else. And then finally, WMI lateral movement. So we've known about lateral movement for a long time. It's been used in just about every attack. Leveraging WMI as a method to do this is not uncommon. SMB is another method for lateral movement. Once you start locking down SMB, other methods are going to be evaluated and checked by attackers on the network. So, yeah, it's a shame to see that these are the common things. I mean, the first 2 brute forcing accounts with weak and guessable passwords, and then Kerberoasting, those are 2 things directly related to passwords, especially with privileged accounts. We've got to make sure those passwords get updated. Checking file system permissions, getting auditing on those, good thing to do, and patching these old systems, or at least figuring out how to isolate these old systems. WannaCry, Eternal Blue, getting them off the network or isolating them, and then finally limiting access to systems to ensure that only those that need WMI access or SMB or RDP are only available for those that absolutely need them.
I think a time traveler from 2010 or even earlier would be like, really? This is 2023? This is your list?
Right. Yeah, I mean, at Trimark, we track a lot of this internally as well, and it tracks pretty closely to what we've seen as the most common significant findings in Active Directory come down to old passwords on privileged Active Directory accounts, accounts that are likely Kerberoastable, service accounts that don't need to be in domain admins and other groups that are in there, Active Directory domain controllers configured with auditing that's suboptimal to ensure that you can detect malicious activity. It continues. It's the same thing that we saw last year as we saw the year before. History repeats itself. It's getting better a little bit at a time. We are seeing more environments with the principal or service disabled on domain controller, so that's positive. But it took a few years to get to that point. So hopefully in a year or 2, we'll see less of these on that list. Hopefully.
With what disabled, did you say?
The principal or service does not need to be enabled on domain controllers, and there's a number of attacks that can be done against that. So we're seeing that disabled more and more in environments. So that's positive.
Good. Always good to hear some positive trends.
Right.
Yeah, we're getting there. Somebody earlier today published a link to a GitHub where somebody had listed every single execution protection feature that had been introduced into Windows and when it was introduced, and it was an interesting list. Like it's not like Microsoft isn't working on the problem, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It just takes time.
All right. This next one kind of shocked me a bit. Like, this is Google's thing. Sponsored links in Google search results, more often than not, especially if you search for certain things like OBS, will get you infected with malware. I found this pretty shocking. I thought this was a solved problem a long time ago, but there's people basically saying don't ever click a sponsored link. This is Google's bread and butter. This is still over 90% of the revenue, right? Is just Google AdWords, is including sponsored links in search results, and you can't trust them. I was kind of shocked to see this.
Yeah, this is kind of crazy. I read through the thread, read through this a couple days ago, or whenever it popped up on Twitter, and I was shocked too. I mean, promoted link, download OBS. install it. Things didn't work the way it was expected, and then all of a sudden, the person lost their wallet. They lost their crypto wallet. They lost their NFTs that they had been capturing and collecting over time and paid for. Just everything. And the only way that they knew about it was people started asking them, "Hey, this doesn't look like you posting on the social media site, and it looks like you transferred away this NFT, and this other cryptocurrency is disappearing or leaving, or you're getting rid of it." It's pretty scary to think that by clicking on a link and then running a file from that link that you think that you should trust, that Google had promoted for you, that you lose everything from the crypto space. The person in the thread said, "Yeah, I probably should have been more careful about where my wallets are and where I manage these things." But these things happen. I mean, even the best, most security conscious folks get tricked at times. I certainly almost clicked into a Zoom link before and put in credentials I shouldn't have. I got very close to it. But it is challenging at the best of times to make sure you get everything right and do everything right. It just shows that you need multiple layers to protect some of your digital assets, where we weren't really thinking about that so much 10 years ago.
But these sponsored links are everywhere. I mean, if you're
Yes.
a Gmail user, Google puts sponsored links in there that basically look like emails, into your email inbox. It's folks are going to be very vulnerable to this. So it's I hope Google has a plan to address this, because it's
and then AI, you can basically build these with AI chatbots. Like, build me a pitch for this in a sponsored link, and get that churned out. I mean, the capabilities of scammers now is going to go through the roof, because remember, it used to be the situation where you'd look for grammar issues, you'd look for spelling issues. Now they just need to ask ChatGPT or another AI to go, "Hey, help build this out for me." And then, I am the son of a prince in Africa, and I have $10 million that I need to give away. Write a convincing letter that I can send to someone to help me move that money.
Could it be? Is it time to switch your default search engine to Bing? I mean, it's got ChatGPT. It doesn't have malware links. Is today the day? Is it time?
Oh, hard no. No way. There's no way I ever type into my browser Bing and say, "Oh, that's a smart move." It's never going to happen.
Maybe DuckDuckGo then.
That one I'll do. Bing, no way.
There's actually a bunch of new ones out there. There's U.com. There's Neva. There's actually like a little mini revolution in search engines right now. There's a bunch of alternative ones out there that are startups, and all 100% basically saying, "Look, we're not going to make money off of advertising and messing with the search results." And,
absolutely.
I think
Christine on my team pointed me to U.com, and there's also a chat bot component of that. And so one of the first things I typed in was write me a haiku about giraffes. And because I have a kid that likes giraffes, and then another one about
first thing, because that's a logical first.
Absolutely, of course. And then the other one I did was I then the next idea from an animal was a zebra. So I was like, write me a poem about zebras in the style of what was it? I just forgot it. The person who wrote Dickens. So write me a poem about zebras in the style of Charles Dickens. And that was pretty amusing.
That's great. I've been meaning to explore some of those more. I do have a U.com account and a Neva account. I've played around with them a little bit, but I need to experiment more with just making them by default, especially now that I apparently can't trust, like Google's results are still good. It's just when they insert the sponsored stuff. And I think a lot of these alternative search engines are actually using Google's results behind the scenes. I think they actually pay Google and use Google APIs to have good quality results rather than reinvent that wheel. But then layer their own value on top of that. All right. See, we got a good essay from Helen Patton here, Security FOMO, that's given me a lot of thought. I generally think, and I've seen some CISOs on LinkedIn basically saying, hey, I put aside a certain amount of time every week just to talk to security vendors every week. And I don't know, more and more, I think maybe security leaders shouldn't be talking to vendors quite that often. Like there's only so many vendors that you need. And from that point on, I think it's kind of a distraction. Like, yes, listen to our podcast so you can keep up with what's going on in the market and stuff like that. Like, I'm not saying it's not worth some time to keep up with what's going on in the market, but letting people brief you, multiple times a week, every week, just seems kind of like a distraction to me. So it's a good essay. It really gets you thinking about, and it's kind of written from the point of view of CISOs kind of overwhelmed, like always thinking they're behind, going to security conferences. Yeah, every time they think they've got things locked down, they find out about more risks and more ways that they can get hacked. So I think it's a good read.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one organization I worked at years ago, and they did a vendor bake-off every couple of years where they identified certain spaces, certain areas. They had vendors come in back-to-back over the course of a week and have the different vendors come in, pitch them on what they're doing. They'd talk through it. They'd kind of tabletop afterwards what vendors kind of make the short list, and then they'd work with them to figure out if that made sense for their environment. Nice little pulse check on where things were in the industry, and also to compare where things were. Maybe a vendor, the last time that they did it wasn't quite there from a technology standpoint or a maturity perspective, but then more recently maybe they are, and then bring them in to actually do a proof of concept, a POC, and see where that goes. Certainly going to conferences and looking at the vendor floor can be helpful in that regard, but it can be overwhelming for sure.
I'm going to go ahead and jump to our squirrel story and get things wrapped up here. And it seems like it's been an all Chat GPT day. So again, we're talking about Chat GPT here. The story is abstracts written by Chat GPT, full scientists. And, my thought here, and just earlier today, I saw that BuzzFeed is planning on having ChatGPT write articles and publish articles to BuzzFeed. And I imagine BuzzFeed, like everybody else, has done some layoffs. So, there's some, people are bound to feel a little resentful about that, about AI's taking our jobs. Like, I guess that's going to be an ongoing topic now. But now at the same time, I also saw somebody said they saw a posting for $250,000 to $300,000 for somebody to write AI prompts. And I know we've covered this in the past. There's a website you can go to where people just come up with prompts for Midjourney, for DALL-E, even for ChatGPT. We're actually coming up with the AI prompt can be complex enough that it's a recognized skill, and apparently you can make $300,000 a year writing ChatGPT and Midjourney prompts, and you can buy and sell them on promptbase.com. So, or maybe it's promptbase.ai. I don't remember.
I am all over that, Adrian. Sign me up tomorrow. I'm just going to sit around and type in, hey, can you create pictures of giraffes with Charles Dickens poems, please?
It's incredible how specific they get with some of these, though. I urge everybody just to check out PromptBase, just to get at least a high-level understanding of how specific you can get with it. You can basically almost replace a graphic designer with this if you know exactly what to ask for. It'll spit out icons for you, it's like a whole thing that somebody would take a couple hours to create in Canva. You can just write a prompt to have that generated.
The children's book we looked at in a previous episode worked out so well, right, Adrian?
Yeah.
How,
Yeah, we
how
never
well,
actually did that.
how well might this work if I use ChatGPT to create prompts to be sold in PromptBase?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds doable. As long as the the data in ChatGPT is new enough for them to even know that these things exist to write prompts for, right? Like it can certainly write code. I've seen a lot of people have ChatGPT, like they've asked it, write me some code for, for a plugin for this, and it'll do it. But yeah, as long as it knows about it, I don't see any reason why you couldn't just automate the whole process, Tyler. You gonna cut me in, Tyler? You there?
I think he's trying to figure out how to prompt the AI to write prompts for him.
Maybe he said something too dangerous and the AI's cut him off.
Oh, right.
He looked frozen.
You
Okay.
angered the AI.
Yeah. Well, that's we're about to wrap here anyway, but it would be nice if we can get Tyler back so we can wrap up here. But yeah, I mean, kind of my point in including the squirrel story is if professionals and experts can't tell ChatGPT from a human, what kind of potential problems are we going to run into as a result from that? Like already I've heard teachers say, look, like, if you can have an AI write something that clears a plagiarism checker, like people can just cheat. Students can just cheat endlessly. Like there's no way to know if an essay was written by a person or not. Right. You'd almost have to have them write it live or interview them or something like that. I'm just trying to think of what kind of problems this is going to cause now that you have something that can write stuff that is impossible to tell if it came from an AI or a human.
Yeah, the only thing I could think about on that was one of the writing assignments that I had to do back in school was I had to put together the outline. I had to show drafts. I had to show how I was progressing in the writing. So it might be a situation where someone has to show the versions, like show a first draft, this, that, and the other, and the evolution of the writing, which the writing style is also fairly unique to the person. So I think that I don't know that we're 100% there yet as far as someone can just submit that and then get it back and get a full paper as far as something in the same writing style as what I would write versus what you would write, Adrian. But certainly the concerns that I've seen online from professors is like, yeah, the essay's dead now because the chatbots are so good at doing comparison, doing some analysis, answering the question in a way that would get an A or at least a B. Yeah, that makes it really, really challenging to be a teacher and assign essays, which are going to be a huge portion of the grade. It's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Tyler's never going to hire anybody to do content marketing again. He's just going to use ChatGPT because he's cheap. That's the point there. He's cheap. He's a very cheap guy. Won't get a haircut every 2 weeks. Goes every 4 weeks instead.
I haven't gotten a haircut since June, so there's that, but I'm growing it back out again.
I had to give him some crap there, especially since he dropped. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for joining me today, and big thanks to Tyler for being here as well. A bit outside the norm for our podcast this week, but we've got some great guests coming up next week. We've got, I forget who we've got, but we've got some really good guests coming up. I know Ross, who does the newsletter that we were talking about earlier, he's coming up soon as a guest. We've got some book authors who are dropping some books. It's going to be a new kind of guest that we get. We're going to do some book release interviews, and a lot of great stuff coming up to look forward to. So until then, thanks for everyone listening or watching to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. See you next week.